Right.
The only way of teaching me to be me is through our relationship to our languages as foundation, and then add any other number of languages you want here.
T14 tata tamaka togui twaku tulia toiro traumira Tanzania turahale yone togui twakwa tulia tuero toru tranino.
Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to?
Hi everyone. I have always looked at some of the names that I used on social media and by extension the identification documents of some of the strangers, some of my friends, and even very close relatives. And I have felt the disappointment and the shame that comes with that. That these people, most of them over 18 years old, do not know how to write their own names. And you know what Chinua Achebe says? That when a madman walks naked, it is his kinsmen who feel shame, not himself. That has been my predicament for many years. Feeling ashamed on behalf of my brothers and sisters from my community who do not know how to write their own names. This is one of my cousins, Madhea Wajeroge, a student at Moi University, but he does not know how to write his own name. What a tragedy. This is the correct way of writing the name Madhea, but the correctest way would be this. This is Madhea's younger brother, Gideon Getao. Without going so deep into it, the correct way of writing Getao is this way. Now, the question is, how did we end up in such a shameful pit where people don't know how to write their own names? And I have the answer. The answer is when you look at these young men's senior brothers that we grew up with at a time when in lower primary we used to be taught exclusively in our mother tongue, Kaikuyu. The name Moreithi is especially challenging, and I bet you have seen so many wrong versions of the name. The other name that my people have completely massacred is Thuo, with very few correct versions of the name found on the internet and even our identification documents. I don't want to go so deep into this issue because the number of wrongly spelled names of members of my community is so huge, and I'm ashamed on their behalf. Additionally, I have dealt with this issue before in this video. The issue that I want to deal with today is that this generation that does not know how to write their own names now has children of their own in nursery and lower primary that are now being taught French right at their formative years of education. This will only serve to alienate these children even further from their identity. To those that know their names, very few know the meanings of their names. A lot of times I find myself asking my students, what's your name? Wangari. What's the meaning of Wangari? They look at me. What's your name? Chepngetich. What's the meaning of Chepngetich? They don't know. Even simple Dholuo names such as Otieno, you would be surprised that this generation does not actually know the meaning of their names. And you want to tell me that are people who do not know their names, who do not know how to write their names, who do not know the meanings of their names, should be taught French, German, Arabic, Chinese? I beg to differ. The great Professor Gogewa thiong'o says that if you know all, and I mean all, the languages of the world, and you do not know your mother tongue, that is enslavement. If you know your mother tongue, and add all the languages of the world to it, that is empowerment. And that is unfortunately what is happening in our schools. Enslavement masquerading as empowerment. Enslavement that has been sugar-coated with ideas of the world has become a global village. That we are giving these children opportunities that we never had. That we are giving our children opportunities and looking beyond the borders of this country. That is enslavement. There is no other term for it. And let me tell us, it is more serious than this, because one of these days we shall transition into the afterlife. And we are on the line going to heaven. And God is seated there with a list of the people who are supposed to get in heaven. And he says, next, a good friend of mine comes out, Lucy Waithera. Yes, ID please. God looks at the ID and the name he has on the list, because God has written the correct name in his list in heaven. But Waithera has the wrong name in her Kenyan identity card. And God is trying to compare the two, and looking at Waithera and seeing something suspicious here. And I'm the one now, because I shall have gotten in heaven much earlier. And I'm there, trying to tell God, uyu namjua. Aki, this one we used to be with her in Noret. I swear before you. Faster, come. But how many people can I save in that kind of manner? Because eventually God will have to look at his list. The name Wamboi comes up. The name Dhuo comes up. The name Wajiro comes up. And he will have to suspend all the Kenyans and say, if you're a Kenyan, please stand there. And the Luos will be there protesting. Bwana, it is not all of us, Bwana. It is only the Okuyus who do not know how to write their names. God will hear none of it. It is that serious. A people who do not know their names, it is too serious to be ignored. And so my appeal to the director and the management and the school administration where my children go to school is only one. Kindly do not teach them French, especially in their formative years of PP1 all the way to grade 3. Am I against French? Of course no. But it should be mother tongue first and then French later. It cannot be the other way around.
A language that can give them a sense of who we are.
Right.
Or what the lady poet said, teach me to be me.
Right.
The only way of teaching me to be me is through our relationship to our languages as foundation, and then add any other number of languages you want here. Yeah.
And in the new CBC curriculum, even these indigenous languages should be taught from grade 4 in the upper primary. And so you can take the advantage of the formative years of the lower primary to teach them their own mother tongue. And then start with French, Chinese, German, and Arabic from grade 4 upwards. But there are 3 issues that can immediately be raised here. The first one is the fact that it is the responsibility of the parents to teach their children their mother tongue, and not the school. That is very true, and it is something that I have advocated for in this video, but not holistically true. According to a thesis by Obungu Dominic Ochieng, he distinguishes between acquisition and learning. What happens at home is majorly acquisition and not learning. In the same way that most of our kids nowadays speak Kiswahili or English at home and are still taught the same in school. Because at home we don't teach kiambishi, kianzilishi, kiangelia changa, munyambuliko wa sentensi. You cannot call your kid and then tell him or her, kuja hapa tunyambue sentensi. So, the same thing should happen. Teach the rules and the structures of our local languages in school. The name of this road near Nanyuki town was most likely written by a Kikuyu, but disappointingly, this man or woman did not know that in our language there is no D without an N. So the correct name is Kegwandi, although the N is silent. This is why they need the teaching. The second issue that can be raised here is what will happen to the other kids that do not belong to the predominant community of that area. For instance, there are a few Luo, Kisi, Kamba, Kalenjin kids, among others, in the school where my children go to school. What will happen to them? Now, this is the problem with Africans. Africans hate themselves, and not only hate themselves, but also hate their own kind. In other words, Africans hate fellow Africans. And this has been noted by great people like Malcolm X, right in 1960s. He used to ask, who taught you how to hate your own kind?
Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to?
Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o has dealt with the issue. Professor Makau Mutua has been dealing with the issue in his articles in Daily Nation. Africans hating themselves and Africans hating their own kind. Africans have no problem teaching our kids French, German or Chinese, but have a big problem with a Luo boy deep inside central Kenya being taught Kikuyu, a foreign language, to the little Luo boy in an area where the Kikuyu language is predominantly used in day-to-day activities. I remember one day standing in awe and admiring my good friend Napuku Namakwa, a Luya, who was now speaking fluent Kisii to a Kisii guy because the Reverend Namakwa was raised in Kisii. And so there is no problem learning other African languages. In fact, I would feel so good if I was working in Homa Bay County and my children started speaking the Luo. And at a personal level, I feel too bad that I grew up in Kitale from standard 5 and yet I can speak very little Luya or Bukusu language for that matter. The third issue that I'll be faced with is that the management of these schools will tell us, you are advocating that we should teach your children the local languages. Kindly give us a teacher who is capable of teaching the Luo, Kikuyu, Maasai, Turkana, or Somali language. And they would appear to beat us 10-0, hands down, because in the whole republic, we don't have a single teacher who has been taught in college how to teach our local indigenous languages. And it is not just teachers. We don't have any curriculum books or storybooks for the same local languages. Very few, if any, and for very few communities in our country. Despite the new CBC curriculum advocating for Kenyan vernacular, there is very little that the government or the Kenyan publishers have done towards making it a reality. But for the sake of our local languages and to prevent their imminent deaths, I would advocate for untrained teachers and teaching the basics of the languages even without the formal curriculum books. People like me who are taught in my mother tongue from nursery to class 3 can comfortably teach the basics of our local languages. I can't imagine that the richness of our languages, the history, the proverbs, the riddles, the songs, the tongue twisters are all in the process of being buried. Zizikwe katika kaburi la sahau. It is such a sad state of affairs. The other day I was traveling in my car and then the DJ in a local radio station decided to play some of the Kikuyu oldies. And among them was the children's songs. And one of them was Ngobe Neamagoro Mana Na Nekuru Maga Ta Nekuru Metuone. The moment I heard that song, there is this thing that literally awakened in me and took me back to those good old days when I was a little boy. I can't imagine that all this is gone. Our riddles. Watadai, dagwata. Datema mutidati gogetoga. Teacher. Roi. T14. Tata tamaka togu itwa kutulia toiro, turaumira Tanzania. Turale yone togu itwa kwa tulia tuero, toru, turanino. Tongue twisters. Kana kani kora kona kora kora. Nako kora kona kana kani kora kora nako kora. Ah, come on. Wakaradha netsuradhane. Nawadadha gago de jira. Nasio nyama itware atsugi. Nawatsugi, matsure tohiyo. Oh, I can't imagine that all these songs are now almost being buried, never to rise again. It is time to teach these children our local languages. It doesn't matter where they are. There is always a predominant language, even in Nairobi. Nairobi is divided into some big slums, and these slums are occupied by the members of a particular group. So they can still be taught even within Nairobi. Cosmopolitan as it looks, but there is always the dominant community. And there is no problem with the dominant community's language being taught to the less dominant community. There is no problem if the boy is in Kibera being taught the Luo. There is no problem if the boy or the girl is in Kawangware being taught the Luya language, even if the boy is a Luo or a Kikuyu or a Waria, they shall begin to appreciate these languages. These are languages that these young men and women will definitely use during their lifetime, because there is 100% chance of meeting a member of the different community as they walk around this country. But look at French this way. This is a language that most likely, we talk about probabilities, we talk about science here and appreciate science. The chances of them using French in their life, or going to France, or going to a country where French is used, or making French a career subject for them, is almost zero, or tending towards zero, like we used to say in college. But for the other languages, there is 100% chances of them using it in their day-to-day activities in this country. Think about it that way. Thank you so much. I'm out.